head teacher of a school, is it down to you, is it down to the Education Authority to know whether there is potential problem with concrete in your school?
It's impossible for a head teacher to know those sorts of technical things. Look, as a head teacher, I would always make sure that repairs to the building, sometimes to the roof, were done in the school holidays. You know, it's worrying to me that we have such complacency from politicians. This is a very serious crisis. The number one priority for government, for schools, parents, teachers, is to make sure our children are safe. And there's a real problem here. And we need to know a lot about it. And we also need to know why we have this problem. And I taught for 35 years. The origins of this problem go back to the 1980s. And by the way, the Department for Education's own building is in danger, I would say, because that was renovated in the 1980s. There was a former building in Waterloo. It's now moved to Westminster. And if hopefully that won't fall down. But, you know, maybe it'd be a good thing if it did, as long as there's nobody in it, because they're making a right mess of this whole crisis. And it really is a crisis.
But Chris, is there some responsibility in the hands of the head teachers if they've been sent these questionnaires and they've just put it on a pile of papers to deal with at some point in the future, and they've gone, well, there's no cracks in the ceiling, the school's probably all right? Then maybe this is now they're chasing them up and they're all going, oh, we haven't done it and we don't know, and the school might fall down. Is everybody now panicking?
There's a sense of panic. Look, as a head teacher, I would always act responsibly. A head teacher should take note if they're given questionnaires about the building. They should draw attention, of course, to the local authority if there are problems. But it's impossible, really, for head teachers to do everything. They are not architects. They're not engineers. They are trying to run a school. And I think probably they needed a lot more support. What's worrying to me is that these problems were known about. We, as our campaign group, were mentioning this some time ago. There is a problem about the safety of school buildings. And there's a problem which goes back, you know, perhaps 10, 20 years.
Well,
Fortunately, some children...
Because I think
some children in Victorian buildings, which, of course, are OK.
Yeah, ironically. It goes back further, because I was pointing out earlier, the Standing Committee on Structural Safety, back in 2007, Chris, identified this concrete had, at best, a shelf life of 30 years and was recommending it was removed from many public buildings, including schools. That's 16 years ago.
Absolutely. And it's irresponsible of government to try to avoid the problem. And they would always talk about money. But what I would say is, look, there has been money. We spend more money on education than almost any other country on the planet. And the majority of staff in schools are not teachers. We need to look at where the money's going. The money should have been focused, first of all, and primarily on the safety of children. I think, you know, we need to get to the root of this. Other countries, Italy is an example, have had buildings falling down, have had bridges falling down, people dying. They've gone back and they've looked at what actually happened 20, 30 years ago. Who was responsible for all of this? We need to hear from those people. Some of them are still around. But most of all, we need to ensure that children are safe. And we can't guarantee that in certain schools. So we're going to have to go back to online learning in some cases. And, you know, we know how bad that was for everybody.
What will it be like for heads at the moment, Chris? It's the 4th of September today. A lot of schools back today. A lot of them will go back Tuesday, Wednesday this week. How do you manage this as a head? How do you communicate information to the parents if it is your school that's closing? What have you got to deal with?
Well, when there's a crisis like this, you know, you've got to maintain some sort of calm, of course, but you've got to be sensible as well. Whenever there was a crisis in my school, I would always say to the staff and to the pupils, we got through the Battle of Britain, we'll get through this. You know, we have to be a little bit positive about this. But there are dangers here. And it would be, if a head teacher has concerns about the safety of the building, then, you know, they really can't have children in classrooms which are likely to fall on their head. We've had situations in primary schools where these concrete beams have actually broken and collapsed when the children weren't there, of course. So what do you do as a head teacher? You have to show leadership. We're not getting leadership from government or from ministers. They need to be open and direct and honest. They need to name the schools. They need to explain why the problem arose. But always they're trying to cover up. It's a PR exercise. The Secretary of State looks slightly panicky, I have to say. But we need to be honest. Most of all, why have we got the problem? How did it come about? What have we got to do today and tomorrow to make sure children are not in danger? And if they have to go home, they have to go home because safety comes first.
This should all be about the children, Chris, shouldn't it? They've had so much disruption to their education. How bad is it for a child who perhaps is going to be effectively locked down again? The Secretary of State said it's not the same as lockdown. It will feel like it to kids and their parents grappling to teach them at home now.
Well, the lockdown was a disaster. We as a campaign group were one of the few organisations saying we should never have lockdown. If I was being very, very cynical, I would say, well, of course, we closed the schools down and we got the best ever results ever. So the best way to improve standards is to close the schools. That's the cynical point of view. And of course, it's nonsense. We're living in an Alice in Wonderland world here. And we can't be closing schools down constantly and damaging children's education. Well, first of all, we've got to face up to the problem. And it's incumbent on the Education Secretary to face up to the problem, tell us exactly what the problem is and what we've got to do tomorrow. And that's what you do if you're in government. You have to have some spine. You have to have some leadership. And we want to know, head teachers need to know, if they've got a problem in their school, what do? They need to be told a little, because they've got to look after these children. And what happens to a head teacher if they say, right, kids, it's not safe in this school, you're going to have to go home? And for some children, I work with children from very poor backgrounds, deprived backgrounds. The school is the one place in their entire life, the one refuge where they can go for safety. And now that's no longer safe.
Yeah.
There's a danger. So I don't want to overreact, but we've got to be sensible and honest.
Absolutely. Yep.